the traditional view on the west front of the Capitol for the swearing-in ceremony. That will be happening inside the U.S. Capitol Rotunda with a much smaller audience. Only about 600 people can fit in there, according to what organizers have told us, instead of the hundreds of thousands who perhaps would have been on the National Mall to watch the swearing-in. But that will be the next stop after this one. Again, we are watching the White House here, where President-elect Donald Trump and Melania Trump will be shortly arriving for their meeting with President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden. This is a tradition on Inauguration Day. It's not one that we saw 4 years ago, but it is something that we are watching for today, for the outgoing and incoming presidents to have an informal handoff of power before they ride together to the U.S. Capitol for the formal handoff of power, for the swearing in of the new president and the farewell of the outgoing president. That's what we'll see for Joe Biden and Jill Biden after the official swearing-in ceremony, when they depart the Capitol grounds, headed for Joint Base Andrews, and then on from there to Santa Ynez, California, for some respite and time away after their time in the White House has ended. So, Sagar, we are still sitting here and watching the White House. So after this, where will we see these outgoing and incoming presidents head? Where do they go next?
They will make the traditional ride together. The outgoing president, the incoming president, on that 3-mile drive to the Capitol. Instead of taking that traditional walk down on the West Front, they'll be walking into the Capitol Rotunda for the oath. Notable that it was just 2 weeks ago that much of official Washington also gathered in the Rotunda. That's where Jimmy Carter's body was lying in state. And now 2 weeks later, the public will again be focused on what happens underneath the Capitol dome. That ride together is always fascinating. We've seen images from the early 1900s of open vehicles, and you have names like William Howard Taft and Warren Harding and others riding. And now, obviously not an open top, but you should have Joe Biden and Donald Trump riding together in a armored limousine up to the Capitol, where Donald Trump will go from being the 45th president and an ex-president to now being the 47th president.
Seeing there some of the Trump family members exiting the church, purportedly also getting ready to start making their way over to the Capitol for the swearing-in, which will be happening in just over 2 hours from now. Yes, Sagar, I've often wondered on that ride between the White House and the Capitol, what is the conversation like? Obviously, these two, it would be very interesting to know, but I mean, Donald Trump's been there before. He might not have any requests for tips, which another incoming president might have.
I think the thought is, especially with this relationship and that fraught relationship Donald Trump has had publicly with his predecessors, that it would be contentious or that there would be nothing at all. But if you remember, during Jimmy Carter's state funeral at the National Cathedral, Donald Trump and Barack Obama sat next to each other and looked like they were joking and laughing.
Lots of conversation.
And having fun. Would love to know what it is they were talking about, but they both looked very at ease and almost friendly. And we know that is not, again, at least publicly, the relationship that has been described. So is this going to be Joe Biden giving Donald Trump some final tidbits about the state of affairs? We're going to find out.
All right, we see now images of the motorcade arriving at the White House. Not a very long drive, but especially not, I guess, when you're president-elect. A lot of streets do get shut down for you. But now we see the Vice President Kamala Harris and Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff standing there to receive official guests on their last day, also as part of the outgoing Biden and Harris administration. So let's listen in for a moment.
the effort. Thanks, mate. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Here's a look inside the U.S. Capitol Rotunda, where we are seeing some musical selections being performed. Again, that is where President-elect Donald Trump will be taking the oath of office about 2 hours from now. Inside, because it is very cold here in Washington, and official events have been moved from the west front of the Capitol to inside the Rotunda. So let's listen in to this musical performance. Now you're seeing the U.S. Capitol, where just in the past couple of moments we have seen some members of Donald Trump's family arriving. We just saw daughter Ivanka Trump and her husband Jared Kushner and their children arrive for Donald Trump's inauguration, which will be happening in just over 2 hours. On your screen, you also see a helicopter. That will be Marine One. At least it's Marine One when the president is on board. I'm a little bit unclear exactly what it is called when a former president is on board. And that will be the case when we see Joe Biden and Jill Biden departing the Capitol after the swearing in of Donald Trump. Then he will be the former president. They will be leaving the Capitol grounds, headed to Joint Base Andrews, and flying on to California from there. So there's the shot of the U.S. Capitol, and now there's the Capital One Arena. Again, that is also a location here in Washington playing a role in part of our inauguration of the next president. That is where Donald Trump will be going after he is sworn in for an event that is standing in for what would have been the inaugural parade throughout Washington, but instead will now be kind of a new sort of event with some of the same parties taking place. We expect to see a lot of music. We also expect that Trump, who will then be the president, may sign some of those executive orders that he has promised he will be enacting today as among his first official acts on becoming president for a second term. So there is also another shot of the U.S. Capitol down Pennsylvania Avenue. That is the traditional parade route where we would have anticipated seeing Donald Trump travel between the Capitol and the White House. He may be driving along that route, but it won't be lined with the tens of thousands of people who ordinarily would have been out there to see him make that very traditional inaugural trip. It is very cold, so officials have told people to stay inside to observe these official proceedings from elsewhere and not gather in large numbers outside. Here in Washington, it is currently about 24 degrees, and it is not anticipated to be much warmer than that at noon, which is when Donald Trump will officially be the next president of the United States. We are still waiting on the Trumps to arrive here at the White House for their tea and coffee private gathering with President Joe Biden and Jill Biden. But we will continue to watch for Donald Trump and Melania Trump to make that trip over to the White House, their last before they officially become president and first lady.
Exactly right. They do. So yeah, 20 minutes worth of tea and snacks and then on the go. Yeah, well, that's going to be on the
I would assume, I mean,
I would think, yeah. A little kid rock. Sure. Thank you.
You're looking again at the White House, where we know that President-elect Donald Trump and his wife, Melania Trump, will shortly be arriving. Again, this is when they will be having their private meeting with President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden, just the four of them, and it's part of that unofficial handover of power between an outgoing and incoming administration. It's not something that we saw happening 4 years ago when Donald Trump was leaving the White House and Joe Biden was coming into it, but it is something that we anticipate seeing today. As we wait for them to roll up, one important note to point out is we did see Vice President Kamala Harris and her husband, Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff, welcome incoming Vice President J.D. Vance and his wife, Usha Vance, just moments ago when they entered the White House. And that's interesting because typically the outgoing vice president will invite the incoming vice president to get together ahead of today. We didn't see that happen between Kamala Harris and J.D. Vance, but we did in this hour just a little while ago see her welcoming him there at the White House, where purportedly they are doing something similar. They're taking a look at President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden as they await President-elect Donald Trump. There he is, coming up to greet them for this private meeting. Let's listen in as Donald Trump and Melania Trump arrive at the White House.
Ask them if they have house triangle now on that.
You're seeing there again a shot of the White House where President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden have just welcomed the Trumps, Donald Trump and Melania Trump, in for their private gathering. On the left, though, you see the Capitol, as well as the helicopter that will take the Bidens away from Washington as the former president and former First Lady in just a couple of hours from now. And this may be a good opportunity for us, Sagar, to kind of talk a little bit about Joe Biden's final actions as president. This is the last day that he will be the current president of the United States. But it has been a pretty active day in terms of official things that he can do in the final hours of his administration. So let's talk a little bit about what are some of those things that we have seen coming out of the Biden White House in these last moments.
The thing that has gotten the most attention that happened, let's see, about two and a half hours ago now, a lot of pardons and commutations from the president in previous days. Some very big names being preemptively pardoned this morning. The president has issued pardons to Dr. Anthony Fauci, the former head of infectious disease research for the United States, General Mark Milley, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the members of the House panel that investigated the January 6th attacks. This is after Trump had basically throughout his campaign vowed retribution against those that he perceived tried to hurt him, tried to hurt the nation. He has long gone after General Milley, whom, again, he hand-picked as his senior military advisor to be in charge of America's military. Long at odds with Anthony Fauci over the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. And then, of course, the January 6th riot, where the president-elect has already said he wants to pardon the rioters. President Biden has now preemptively moved to shield those officials from anything that might happen. He says this is not an admission of guilt or wrongdoing or a thought that they may face prosecution, but I couldn't not do something about this. Both General Milley and Dr. Fauci have come out and said that they appreciate it, that they did not want to have to fight back against what someone, in this case Donald Trump, perceived as some type of slight. Tony Fauci flat says, I have not committed any crimes. I have spent my entire career trying to keep the American people healthy, but I appreciate the president's move. So this is something that had been discussed within the White House for months now. Is the president going to preemptively move to keep these folks out of harm's way, for lack of a better phrase? And that's exactly what he did this morning. It's an extraordinary use of presidential authority and could set the tone for Trump and others to then take actions like this immediately before they leave office.
Right. It's a large action to take, but also literally in the closing hours of an administration. I guess, I mean, there's less time for it to be analyzed while that presidency is still ongoing, because the news cycle will move on necessarily to this next administration. I'm not attempting to analyze exactly why the timing was put like that, but it is something that those of us who cover this have been wondering for a long time. Is this going to happen? And now that it finally has happened in these very closing hours.
It is customary for citizens who've been, in the president's case, convicted of drug crimes and things to receive clemency, but to do it in this kind of untested way with this type of name, Tony Fauci, Mark Milley, Benny Thompson, Liz Cheney right down the row, incredibly unusual. And, as we talk about the peaceful transfer of power and, they smiled and shook hands at the White House, and what are they going to chat about in the limousine? This is directly from President Biden to his successor, hey, you said you're going to do this? I'm not going to let you do it. So here you go. Hours before you have the office, it's still my job. I can do whatever I want. Just pretty stark to see it come out this morning.
Certainly. And then again, that limo ride between where they are right now, you see on your screen in the White House, to where you see on the left-hand side the U.S. Capitol building. That is something I would love to be a fly on the wall just to hear what is discussed and what goes on in that conversation. You're seeing now other images of Washington. On the left-hand side, the U.S. Capitol down Pennsylvania Avenue, that traditional parade route where we expect Donald Trump to be traveling, but perhaps not officially in the parade that ordinarily would take place on an inauguration. That all has been called off and rescheduled to an event you see on the right-hand side in the Capital One Arena here in Washington, where there will be, it's still being called a parade, but we're not exactly sure that it will have the same sort of format, certainly not the marching down Pennsylvania Avenue, but that's where Donald Trump will be going after he is sworn in as president here in just a few hours. And we expect also to see him sign some of those executive orders that Sagar and I have been talking about, some actions that he can take as president and has promised to do, and said right there in Capital One Arena last night that he felt his supporters would be very pleased with the type of executive orders that he would be signing today. So we will keep an eye on all of those spots, but right now, the Trumps and the Bidens continue their coffee and tea private gathering there in the White House on the upper right part of your screen.
Yeah, so what you do is you got a piece of tape. Okay. Okay, I have zip ties. Hold that there. I actually didn't get anything now. There we go. This would be the trick. Okay, so stay. Alright, looks like coming straight out. Not like pinching off to the side or some shit like that. Okay, so you should be pretty good. You got some slack there. We're all good. Move this up close to your feet and you can see this okay.
I would have just a little bit.
Huh? So I can bring it down a little bit.
It's not, yeah, it's not too far down. Yeah.
So this is good. okay there? Good. Oh wow, no, one thing I forgot, but I got stabbed. Okay, sounds good. Got more people right now. Where the some of these other cabinet members.
Ladies and gentlemen, former speakers of the House of Representatives, the Honorable Kevin McCarthy, the Honorable John Boehner, accompanied by Mrs. Debbie Boehner, the Honorable Newt Gingrich, accompanied by Ambassador Callista Gingrich, and Mrs. Heather Foley.
Ready to go?
Right there, man.
Party going to go separately, but they're going to go in the door into the windows right here.
Yes. Spouses will go first. The second spouses will go
Okay,
first.
so everybody will go in right here.
Everybody's going to go, yeah, one car at a time. They'll fill up, leave, the next one comes up.
Okay, very good.
Not yet.